Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and this is Zane's Ultra Combiner Mech, the biggest set of the Ninjago January 2025 wave, and as such, the one that I've been most excited to review, because this even comes with Pixel making a return. And now join me as we jump in to my review of this set and continue our reviews of every single January 2025 LEGO Ninjago set. Let's go! Here we have Zane's Ultra Combo Mech. It will retail for $100 when it releases on January 1st, 2025, and includes a number of different minifigures, including Noct, the Elemental Master of Brute Force, and the new member of the Forbidden Five in minifigure form for the first time, a new version of Pixel making her first appearance in Dragon's Rising, a brick-built version of Zane, an armored-up version of Cole that doesn't appear in any other set so far, 2 Dragonian warriors, and Sora as well, who's just using her Season 1 suit but with a different hood. The entire gimmick of the set is that you can actually take all of these individual vehicles and combine them into one mech. And, well, what are we waiting for? Let's show that on camera right now. So obviously you have Rayu, who is going to make up most of the back of the mech. The mech itself is going to have wings, so that is super cool. And Zane also kind of folds up inside the mech too. Let's just get Zane folded up here so we can actually go ahead and begin the transformation. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on here in terms of making all the vehicles look good on their own while still actually being decent combiner builds. So let's take a look. We'll start with the car, which I don't know if you can tell immediately, but you can see that these are basically the feet over here, and the entire thing contains cockpits and blasters for the characters, but we're going to transform this up first into the legs of the vehicle. Split these apart like so, and you can bend these upwards like that. Then rotate these pieces inwards, so these back wheels move inwards on hinge joints, and then you can splay the legs out and you have the posable legs and feet. Super easy to transform this. Then you take this main section of the body, which is basically a jet which Sora can use to fly around. There's actually a lot of really cool stuff you can do with it, like you can pretend it's flying like this sort of configuration, or have this spin around while you're in flight. We'll take a look at each of the individual components later, but I just want to show this off first. Detach the front pod, detach the back pod, and this basically serves as the main torso. So once that's attached, you can rotate these around, and there you have it. You have the 2 arms of the mech. The hands are actually the individual components. You can choose to put this on either side, but the way it is technically supposed to go is that this is one hand right here, which now has a blaster, which was, of course, the back engine of the jet, and then you have another hand right here, which is the cockpit of the jet, which maybe is the part of it that is the least hidden away. Like, this obviously goes to something else, but I do appreciate that they even included blades on the back here to make it actually have some sort of a weapon function. Then, all you need to do is take baby Rayu, or I guess slightly more grown-up Rayu, place him on the back of the mech, where the designers have kind of joked around that this is basically a Rayu mech, because Rayu is like the pilot of the mech itself. Move the hands down like so, and then the entire neck bends downwards for him to become the head of the mech. And the last piece that you need to put into here is take the Zane buildable figure, which is a really cool buildable character that they've just done for Zane here. You can remove the sword, fold up the arms, and this actually does completely fold up into a very concise configuration here. Once you actually fold up the legs like so, rotate these around, you can actually place Zane inside of the vehicle just like this. You just have to get the clip on just right, and you can go ahead and attach this up. There is an official way to fold up Zane. I am not referring to the instruction manual right now, so I'm probably getting at least a couple bits of it wrong, and we're going to double check the instruction manual, but basically that is what you need to do to combine all of these individual vehicles into one cohesive mech. And it actually works really well. I'm genuinely really impressed with just how they were able to pull this off. You can see that there's a lot of great detail here. There we go. You have the Zane details right here. We'll move Rayu down to the bottom, and this is a whole-on mech form of the combiner vehicle, which is super cool, a very cool gimmick, and definitely not something that has been pulled off this well before. When all is said and done, here is the completed mech form of Zane's Ultra Combiner Mech, which is really cool just how cohesive it feels as a full-on model and how well it actually comes together, and also how easy it is to transform. The mech itself is fully posable, but I'm going to take some time first to talk about the details and the style and the aesthetics here. I love the color scheme of the dark blue and red integrating pixels color scheme, where really this entire thing very clearly feels like a pixel-oriented mech to me, right down to the fact that she has a little place to be stored of her own inside the leg here. The other leg does just open up and has a blaster on the top, which is basically meant for the car form, but that is super cool how you actually have that option, and there's actually quite a lot of different things that you can do with it, not just splitting it up into 4 different components. Let's take a look at the mech and how it plays, and then we'll take a look at some of the other configurations of this build. Despite the fact that this is a combiner style model, meaning that it is generally a little bit harder to pose than a standard Ninjago mech might be, I'm genuinely really impressed by just how much character you could get out of here, mostly because of the fact that you have a very visible head in the center here with Zane's head, and an even more visible head with Ryu's head here, making it look like this is Rayu kind of looking around in a gigantic mech suit. And I am personally really excited to see how this is going to play out in the show. The arms can be moved backwards and forwards like so, and rotated up and down on the shoulders, utilizing the Optimus Prime style ratchet joints. You also have Technic ball joints, or Bionicle ball joints, being used to move the elbows here, and the hands can rotate like so you can move the hands in all sorts of different positions. As far as the legs go, you actually have a pretty good range of articulation. You have the ability to let this walk. Obviously, there are no knees, although to be honest, I wasn't really expecting knees with something like this, especially because it is a splitting vehicle, and they do make up for it because you can actually move the feet around, and you actually do have the posable feet. So thankfully, while most of the weight of the legs is kind of held on the bottom here with a rubberized piece being used on the bottom to keep it from toppling over, you can actually adjust the feet to quite a pretty significant degree, given that they're mostly for aesthetic purposes, and it also just looks a lot better when you have the ability to move the feet. You can get this in all sorts of crazy and wild poses. Let's say you want to have like a slashing pose with the blade. We have Rayu and Zane looking over here, and you're kind of moving backwards with the arm. And even if you wanted to, I bet that if I was really careful, yeah, there you go. You can even get it in a pose where it's kind of running and walking at the camera, which is super cool. Again, not a lot of mechs can do that, especially ones from Ninjago, but they were actually really able to pull it off with this. Now, the mech overall is very cohesive as a build, and I'm really happy with how this looks in general, especially compared to the previous Ultra Combiner mech, which was cool enough as a concept, but I definitely feel like they've basically improved on the formula by introducing this. Everything about it feels a lot more refined than the previous version, and I love how there's little details all throughout, like the Samurai X symbol that first appeared in Season 7, Hands of Time, when Pixel took on the mantle of Samurai X. You even have all sorts of great mechanical detail on the back here with transparent blue jets on the back of the legs, as well as the wheels themselves, which, yes, you can angle on these click joints here, which is very cool. And while the back is fairly bare, mostly to allow for Rayu to attach onto the back, I feel like they did a pretty good job of making it feel like a very solid, cohesive build. Honestly, if it weren't for the giant tires on the side of the vehicle, I would totally believe that this was just a really good-looking mech for Pixel or Zane on its own. But now let's see the transformation the other way one more time, because there's a couple of really cool things that you can actually do with it. Now, first off, we're going to remove Zane from the center here, and as you can see, the mech totally works fine even without him. There even is a core element being used here, and that's probably how I'm going to display the mech on its own, because I want to display Zane with my minifigures, and I'm really glad it still looks good without him. So that's one more configuration, but one other thing that you can do is, once you reattach the wheels for the legs, you can actually cause the entire thing to kind of fold downwards like so. So now you have it in kind of a wheeled pose right here. You can bend the wheels back, turn it back into vehicle form, and flip up the back exhausts. And then you can kind of have it act like its own unique vehicle, where it's like Rayu driving a vehicle. You can move the arms forwards and cause them to be like blasters that it's using against its opponents. It's actually really cool how you're able to make this feel like a totally viable vehicle on its own, even without having to do any sort of removing transformation. And I mean, if you want, you can even leave Zane there. Like, you could totally just leave Zane right here, and this is a pretty decent vehicle by itself. It's a pretty goofy and strange vehicle, but one that I feel like completely does transform the look and feel of what you're trying to do with this build, and still makes it look really good the way that it's built out. Of course, there's a lot of other things that you can do with it, and that is the final transformation. So let's go ahead, pop Zane off there. We're gonna easily pop Rayu off the back. It almost kind of reminds me of some of the Bionicle stuff we got back in the day, where you could just attach a figure to the back of something. And then we are going to remove this entire component, flip, rotating all of these down. So these are now the front headlights of the car. These are now back exhaust, so they can kind of stick out on the back. And the jet is one of the coolest transformations in general, because you take the torso and the arms, which is not something that screams jet, and by simply removing the hands, placing one on the front and one on the back, then you can rotate these all the way around. You get a jet that looks really good. Like, this is a totally viable jet. You can spin this around for some action poses, which looks super cool, and I just feel like that is one of the coolest parts of the vehicles. Oftentimes the jet configuration of the combo models just doesn't look that good, but they pulled it off really well here. And finally, we'll just take Rayu, and it is as simple as just rotating the upper torso back upwards. Now that I've done this a couple of times, it is very easy to just then use him on his own. And then finally, you have Zane here, who does tend to be a little fiddly with the way you want to be positioning the arms and legs, but it's super easy to get him back into normal figure form. And there you have it. These are all 4 components. Let's take a closer look at each one. So here's our build for Zane, and honestly, this is a really solid build. A lot of it is improved by the printed element making up his face here, which I think is super cool. You have the classic Zane symbol they introduced for Season 11, as well as the robotic sheen for the eyes. They do have that metallic paint, and I'm actually really impressed they were able to pull it off without having to do any sort of specialized head mold. He just looks super good here, and I love the antenna on the sides of the head too. Just makes him feel a lot more involved as a character. On the sides here, stickers make up most of the decorations. You have a stickered armor panel on one side, and on the other side you have an armor panel displaying his symbol, and then finally you have the reactor in the chest, which is similar to some of the designs that we're going to see on minifigures for the rest of this wave. You can move the legs around with mixel joints, no knees, but I think it's honestly fine without knees. It would have made it even harder to pose up on the mech if he did have knees, and I do like the fact that even for a figure this small, you do have elbows factored in, which does allow you to get into all sorts of really fun different poses with this figure. Overall, he is definitely a little more posable than a minifigure, not even that much more posable, all things considered. Like, there's not a ton more that you can do with him, but I really like his design and the fact that it very seamlessly connects with the mech by just having a handle on the back, allowing you to really customize him on your own. He's a small build, but definitely one of my favorite parts of the set, and I'm very excited to see how this is going to play out in the story, especially because we're getting like 3 different versions of Zane this wave. There's one with a fully metallic torso, like he's been battle damaged, there's this brick build version, and then there's one in a standard suit, which makes me think that maybe there's an order in which those suits will appear. Let's move on to the next build. Our next standalone character is the young dragon Rayu here, and Rayu seems to have had a bit of a growth spurt with larger wings. These are brand new elements created for Ninjago for this wave. They're kind of like supersized, even larger versions of the already gigantic dragon wings that we got for Knight's Kingdom and Batman. And here's the thing. I definitely feel like they're a little oversized for this version of Rayu. When he's on the mech, I think it looks good, but they're almost comically large compared to the rest of his body. I'm sure they're going to fix that in the future, but it is kind of funny to me how these new wings debuted in 2 sets where I feel like the bodies of the dragons are just a little bit too small to actually account for them. Still, It is really cool to be able to see Rayu grown up a little more, and surprisingly the build was very different than the Young Dragon Rayu build that we got earlier this year. Instead of having a mostly sand blue body, it seems like Rayu has either somewhat changed color, or at least maybe he's wearing some armor with the white and gold on the top here, and then at the bottom you have a predominantly dark blue focus, which is really interesting, showcasing his color changing. I'm really curious that inevitably, I'm sure in like 3 more years, we're gonna get like a gigantic Source Dragon version of Rayu. That's where everybody is speculating his character to go. He's like the missing Source Dragon of balance. That's at least my theory. I'm really curious what color scheme it's going to have. Is it going to be mostly dark blue and sand blue on the top? Are they going to invent and add some more colors? They're already adding a little bit of this flame yellowish orange into the character, which wasn't really there before. So I'm really curious to see where they're going with him, and it certainly is super cool to see the evolution of a character over the span of multiple years. While this doesn't make any major strides over the previous version, I still think it is really cool and definitely very nice to see him growing up even more. This next module is probably my favorite in the set just because of how swooshable and playable it is, and that is Sorus Jet. Of course you have a standard jet mode where you can have this flying through the storm, but you can also choose to rotate all of these components. Zooming out a little bit, you can see just how much fun you can have by simply spinning this around. It kind of reminds me of the Clone Wars style Jedi starfighters as well as the Mandalorian ships, where I can totally imagine like this being a completely acceptable configuration, like flying through a vertical wing. It's a very unique build for a Ninjago vehicle. It's not really something we've seen before, and while this might not even be an intended configuration, I think this looks even cooler than the standard jet form, which looks like this, and it is Lego after all, so you can basically do whatever you want with it. Now, there's a lot of clever stuff going on to actually hide the fact that this is mostly the torso here. Obviously, you have kind of the shape of a torso, but the arms have been rotated around. These act like wings, and since this set was designed by legendary Lego designer Lee Chi-wing, he was able to introduce this particular element in yet another new color. After recoloring it in brown for the temple inside of the Source Dragons, as well as recoloring it in gray, I believe, for the Dragonstone Shrine, this is now in dark blue, which is a really cool recolor of the General Grievous cockpit, which was introduced all the way back in 2011 for the Clone Wars. Now, the only slightly awkward thing here are the elbows. I definitely feel like these, I don't know, maybe could have been augmented with at least something a little bit different, but I really appreciate how they still made them feel like jet exhaust by including transparent blue bricks inside the elbows. So even during the parts that maybe aren't necessarily hidden that well for the transformation, they still look really cool, and the back here makes it look like these are back exhaust engines that fire out. Overall, this is a really, really cool build, and I'm just really impressed how they were able to just be able to transform something like this with very limited removal of pieces and moving stuff around into a full-on flyer. And lastly, that brings us to the wheeled vehicle, which also surprisingly looks really good. If you were to show me this and tell me that this was a standalone set and not part of a transforming model, it would take me at least a few seconds to start noticing the joints like the legs here, the way the click hinges work, and the fact that these are mounted on ball joints, because this looks really good already as a standard build. Of course, you can move all of these up and open, causing the guns to shoot out, and you can even change the configuration of Pixel, so now she's sitting up in the vehicle, driving it alongside a blaster right here, which is super cool. The only thing that I feel like could have been missing was just an easy way to remove this and mount Cole on the inside. It is a little strange how the vehicle does include Cole as a minifigure, but there isn't really an official place, as far as I can tell, for him to actually sit. It really is just supposed to be a combo between Pixel, Zane, Sora, and I mean, really that's it, unless you count Rayu as well, so it's certainly an interesting one, but the vehicle itself looks super cool, and there's actually a lot more things you can do with it. Folding Pixel back down into the vehicle, let's go ahead and see some of the different things, such as the ability to angle these wheels up and down. So if you want to, it's not really official, like you technically aren't supposed to do it like this, but you can choose to position the wheels in a different configuration should you choose to make it look like a different style of car. There are limitations to this though, because then you'd be sliding it alongside the Technic pieces instead of the wheels, but it is a really cool thing to kind of change around the vehicle's look in case you wanted to have it drive one way or another. Of course, one thing I really appreciate is just how well well the front of the vehicle looks, especially because most of this is just the pelvis of the entire mech. As you can see here, the connection points are hidden away underneath the vehicle, and you actually have these lights that are used at the front, which really disguise the fact that these are actually just hinges. Even on the back here, you can see they even included transparent blue components to make it look like these are back engine exhausts. You can angle these back feet element as well that kind of act as little winglets for the car. And overall, this is by far the most successful combo splitting vehicle ever because all of the individual components actually look good. Let's see that transformation one more time and sped up, and then share my final thoughts on this set and the value. Here it is in all its glory, Zane's Ultra Combiner Mech, featuring a jet for Sora, Zane as a brick-built figure, Rayu on the back, and a little car for Pixel as well. And speaking of each of the different characters included in the set, while I will be doing a separate video on all of the Ninjago figures from this wave, I do want to take some time to highlight them, especially because this set does come with a couple of exclusive and currently exclusive figures. I gotta start off by taking just another really quick look at Zane as a buildable character. I obviously did focus a whole section on him earlier in the video, but he definitely does count as a figure to me. It's really cool how they actually made him fully brick built, although I do wish the center chest element was printed. We did get a very similar printed piece in all the other sets, so I'm not really sure why they didn't just use that one, but I also do like how it is unique and really does look like his reactor, so there are pros and cons. Obviously, he is pretty limited in articulation for the knees. There are no knees, but he does have elbows and movable hands, as well as the actual ankles can be moved around via mixel joints, and because the head can also be swiveled around, you actually get a pretty wide range of articulation for this character, which I really appreciate. He's very posable, and he definitely does look like a scaled up version of what Zane does look like, so I'm really curious to see what this is going to be in the show. Moving on from that, of course, the star of the show here is Pixel, making her minifigure return for many years. Actually, it's been since we actually saw Pixel back in Core, at least a couple of years, and years since we've seen her in the TV show as well. So it's cool to see her actually playing a more prominent role in Dragon's Rising. Really curious to see how that is going to factor into the story, but story aside, the minifigure is really nice. I love the lavender integrated into her color scheme from kind of the secondary color around the purple, which is really cool. And the Samurai X logo has still remained unchanged from Season 7 Hands of Time, which I do appreciate because I think it's cool to have that kind of logo consistency. We've come a long way from Samurai X / Pixel being kind of a darker blue and black and gold color scheme. Now she's kind of back to her original color scheme that we had when she was first introduced in Rebooted, and I really like that evolution of the minifigure, how they've basically taken it from a mysterious character to one that very clearly is the character we know and love. She does have the armor piece mounted backwards to not cover up the logo, which I think works fine for the armor piece there, and as well as three different kind of, I don't know what those are, like power cables or fans, like cooling systems on the back of the torso there. I just think it's really cool mechanical detail, but to me, the coolest part of the figure is the fact that she has a specialized robotic mask, almost like an Optimus Prime style mask, which I really hope it appears in the show. I think it looks super cool, but I'm not really holding my hopes up given that most of the ninja masks haven't really appeared in Dragon's Rising so far when it comes to a decal on their face. Moving on to the next exclusive minifigure for now, which I'm sure won't remain exclusive, is Cole here. Cole is in his standard suit that all the ninja are wearing. I'm not 100% sure what like the official name for these suits are. I've seen people call them like the Mech Rider suits or the Storm Rider suits, but no matter what they're called, I actually do like how the ninja feel incredibly cohesive as a team here. Pretty much all of the ninja have the exact same torso print, and the back print is very similar as well, with a dragon showing a split between this kind of like more stylized line dragon and a representation of their elements in the wings. So for Cole, you actually have the back wings of the dragons being made out of rock, which is really cool. Overall, it's an interesting minifigure. The mask is probably the most controversial part of these figures to me. It's dual molded and feels more like a motorcycle helmet or some sort of a jet pilot, which I guess is kind of what they're trying to go for. We're gonna have to wait and see how these look like in the show, but I'm very curious to see what the public's reception to these masks is going to be. I've seen a lot of mixed opinions, and I like them for what they are. I definitely feel like for a traditional ninja mask, I do prefer like the elemental mech suit masks, but this is pretty good for a specialized type of design. Moving onwards to Sora though, I'm gonna be completely honest, I am not a big fan of how they were able to pull off Sora. She is just using her standard Season 1 outfit with the torso and legs remaining unchanged, but what they've done is they've given her one of the Storm Rider masks in gold and white, and the gold to me is just a little bit too overpowering. I almost kind of wish that the color scheme was swapped, where it was a gold base and then a white top, or maybe even like dark blue and white would have been better, given that typically for the Sora hood, we have gotten it in dark blue before. The gold and white just feels really aggressively bright to me, and I think for the spinner it's fine because you want to have something special for the spinner, but for the normal retail set like this, it would have been cool to see just a different color mix for Sora, although I do understand if they didn't have the budget for it. As one of the members of the Ninja team, she's one of the least interesting figures here because we've basically seen the exact figure before except with a new hood, so let's move on to the villains. First off, we finally get Noct, the elemental master of brute force in a set, and I am very happy for the most part with how he's been depicted. Noct has always worn a tattered cape, and it's a tattered cape that LEGO has produced before, so I really do feel like it is a big miss to not include that cape in the version of Noct that we've gotten. He does, however, have an armor piece, which he doesn't have in the show, but I still feel like having that fabric cape would have been super cool to complete the look. Still, without the cape, you can see he does have an additional detail of a Forbidden 5 symbol on the back of the torso, which is very neat to see, and the headpiece itself is really nicely printed. He has an angry scowl there, which is very much in character, although I also feel like it would have been very in character to get like a cheeky evil grin on his face, because I feel like we often see him smiling as well and taunting the ninja, so I'm a bit mixed. I think it would have been cool to get the grin, but the scowl also totally works for him, so I'm good both ways. The figure itself is still very surreal to have in hand, and there's something super satisfying about just having a minifigure of a character that we've followed in the show but never had a minifigure for until now, and it's been basically just, I mean, we haven't had to wait that long, it's really been less than a year, but it's so satisfying to actually have him in hand. The first thing I did though was, of course, give him a cape, the same cape that we got for like the Trolls in Fantasy era and Morrow back in 2015, or Kragger from Shima, so I just gave him that cape because I feel like he's kind of incomplete without it. And finally, we have the two different Dragonians that we get. Starting off, we have the Dragonian Warrior, and these are probably some of the coolest Ninjago villain minifigures I have ever seen. You have 3 brand new molds, a gunmetal gray lower jaw, a dark red upper jaw, and then molds used for the wings. Actually, I guess technically 4 molds if you count the dragon itself as well. So 4 molded elements for a new villain minifigure is absolutely crazy, and it just looks super cool. The printing on the torso and legs kind of reminds me of Nexo Knights, but that's not even a bad thing. I really think that it looks pretty cool. It kind of makes them feel like they're from another world, and just the amount of molded detail here with the wings, the dragon head, everything is just so cool. I also love how on the back of the head you have a fire element, which kind of makes it look like the dragon is breathing fire. I'm super curious if that's actually going to be in the show. Like, are they going to be like somewhat anthropomorphic dragons? Are the dragon heads more ornamental? Because it kind of looks like they could be a little bit of a mix of both, which is pretty interesting because you have a normal face underneath, but then you have one that's just fire for the head to shoot out. So super curious to see how that's going to work, but overall, big fan of these villain minifigures. I think they might be my favorite villain faction so far since Dragons Rising, so that's super cool. And then we have a Dragonian Scout, who isn't quite as interesting as the Dragonian Warrior, just sporting a tan mohawk, a dark tan mohawk there in the same armor piece, but I do like the brick-built axe and how you actually have a different headpiece here for the print. You have just a slightly different expression, and then you don't have the back printing of the fire because, of course, you just have what the head looks like on the back because the mohawk doesn't fully cover it up. Overall, these are very cool villain faction minifigures. I love how you can split off the mini dragons, and I am definitely very excited to see where they go with these in the future. But let's get back to the model. Altogether, I feel like this set really succeeds where some previous models did not in terms of making each and every one of these splitting vehicles cohesive, while also making the entire vehicle not look like a hodgepodge of different ideas. LEGO has been trying to do stuff like this for years. This gimmick is not new, but the fact that it works so well is definitely a new thing for LEGO. Even back to the days of Alpha Team Mission Deep Freeze, we were getting vehicles that could split up and transform and look look like different vehicles, and some were better than others. Nexo Knights Wave 2 really stands out as an example of a wave where LEGO tried to do the gimmick for every single set, and it definitely was a little more successful than others, and less successful in many, many ways, and there was a lot of quality disparity in the sets. Even the previous Ninjago Ultra Combo Mech did not look and play as good as this build, and I feel like LEGO is continually improving and making themselves even better at making incredible builds like these play very well, but also look really good when they're all fully split up. Add to the fact that this has over 1,100 pieces and a really good selection of minifigures, including an exclusive minifigure of Pixel and a so far exclusive version of Noct, although I'm sure he's going to appear in other sets, makes this a really solid set for the January lineup, and definitely one of my favorites. It really does feel like this is worth the price that you pay, and I guess the big question is though, this is $100, and similar mechs like Cole's Titan Dragon Mech from just this year is also $100. They accomplish two very different things, but which one would you prefer? Honestly, for me, I can see the value in both. If I had to pick between one, I still think I would go for the ultra-detailed, single, standalone mech without the gimmicks that is absolutely maxed out on posability, but this provides something completely different, and just a lot of fun for kids to be able to easily transform it from one mode to the other. Altogether, I'm really happy with this set. It is easily the standout of the wave for me, and before we go, just one last thing. They even made a little polybag version of the set as well. This is a little polybag version of the exact build, and what's super cool is that yes, this does represent the combined version, which is somewhat posable. You can move the legs back and forth, the arms are mounted on mixel joints, and you can even move the elbows and adjust the dragon wings on the back, but you can also take this apart and build it into multiple different other configurations of each of the split vehicles. You can't really do it just as a pure transformation, but personally I think that's actually really cool how they managed to make even the polybag do this. So I just had to shout out the polybag here. A lot of it does stay the same when you actually do convert it into a standard build, like most of Rayu is this back part here. Zane is literally just this, which I find to be hilarious, like this is Zane, and it's just a really solid polybag augmenting a really nice set, and it's super cool how we actually got a polybag version of the set as a main build. Altogether, that's pretty much all I have to say about the set. If you want to see up-close and personal looks at the minifigures, I'm going to be doing a completely separate video looking at all of the minifigures in extremely close depth, so stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for watching my review. I guess two reviews in one, because this is a combo mech after all. Might as well make this a combo review of the polybag and the largest set of the wave. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Will you be picking this up? How do you think it compares to the last Ultra Combo Mech? And thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. And bye for now.